Hi there. Welcome to Pallet University and another episode in our Real Biologist Reacts series to the art of the ever so talented Joshua Dunlop. It's been a while since we've updated this series, and as per usual, Joshua has continued to pump out his incredible art, as you can see here. And also, on the last video of these that I posted, he actually commented, because I think that I had said something in the video. I don't actually remember most of the things that I say in these sort of not scripted videos. But he was like, I think I had said that I had said something along the lines of that I was curious about like his thought process in making things, in portraying the Pokemon X way instead of Y way. And he actually commented and was like, well, I go into a little bit of that on my Facebook, so we're going to do a little bit of that today. As we go over the two that we're going to be talking about today, which are some of the recent additions, Electabuzz and Magmar. So if you are at all able to go support Joshua, whether it's just following him on his social medias, which as always will be linked below, or checking out his Patreon as well, that would be ever so appreciated, I'm sure, by him, but also by me, because supporting talented people in the Pokemon community is always a plus, no matter who it is. And with that, I guess let's just get into it, starting with Electabuzz. So I'm going to sort of go through and do my biology talk a bit about the Pokemon, and then go briefly read, because he, the post that he associates these with on Facebook. So, first things first, this is immediately, like, cat-like, which I guess if I had to sort of fit an animal to Electabuzz, it probably would be a cat. Certainly not either of its, Elekid or Electivire. I would call either of them cats. I'd say they look more like apes. But yeah, I probably would say cat for Electabuzz. And that is very clearly what he's going with here. These eyes are very cat-like. And with it being dark and relatively far away from like the full zoom out shot, it's gonna get a little grainy, but we'll do the best we can. So these eyes look very much like a lion's eyes, especially with sort of the black outline around it. And also lion's eyes are like this golden color with relatively small pupils. I'm curious though, I kind of would have thought more cheetah-like eyes, but I guess lion eyes and cheetah eyes do look very similar. Cheetahs just sort of have these black stripes under their eyes that basically function the same way that like a baseball player, when they put like the black, I think it's just called like eye black, but when they put just like the black streaks under their eyes, it like cuts down glare. That's the same reason that cheetahs have them, I would think. Well, it would depend on a lot of things. Electabuzz, clearly he depicts it in sort of looks like a parking garage sort of environment. That's what it looks like to me. If Electabuzz is more of an urban Pokemon, because I'm trying to think where you actually find it. Obviously in Gen 1 you find it in the power plant, and I believe that's the only spot. In other places, I feel like you don't find it too often, just sort of out in the wilderness. I don't know that for sure, but I feel like that's true. I can't think of any particular spots where you find it just sort of out and about on like a random like super rural route off the top of my head. So it makes sense that it wouldn't need sort of that glare type thing if it's going to be inside a fair amount of the time, or at least in a not sunny environment a lot of the time. This is really neat though. This right here, the rostrum or the snout is very much like Creative Liberties from Joshua, like the sort of the snarling nose wrinkles. As far as I know, I mean, I probably should look up what the Pokemon actually looks like instead of just doing it from memory before I start doing these, so I'm going to do that. Yeah, so Electabuzz, as I'm sure you can all see below me, is very brachycephalic, which means its face is very flat. So for example, a dog has like a really, well, typical dogs, we'll say like a retriever, a golden retriever or a lab, have a really long snout. Whereas a cat or some, they're called brachycephalic dogs, are the ones with like the really flat faces, such as like pugs or bulldogs. They just have flatter faces. Electabuzz is very brachycephalic. And it doesn't really even look to have much of a nose. I think it might have a couple like nostrils, but it certainly doesn't have sort of like a lion sort of muzzle, which he gives it here. It definitely does have these really big teeth that are presumably canine teeth, but with Pokemon, I guess it's kind of hard to say. I would presume that they are canine teeth, but Electabuzz does definitely have those. There's no evidence for like these whiskers or sort of hair around its muzzle. So this is one case where I think, Joshua's creative liberties make Electabuzz look way better than the original. I really, really enjoy that. I always sort of picture Electabuzz with these big honking arms that are really muscly and then relatively short legs. I think he made the legs relatively longer just to make it sort of look more like a feasible animal, because Electabuzz in general, like its arms are really, really long, but its legs always, at least in my mind, seemed really short. But let's take a look at the arms. So Electabuzz definitely does have forearms that are sort of bigger around and more muscular than its upper arms. So that's definitely true. Although he does give him, Electabuzz has been working out. He's got some big, I don't feel right calling them the right muscles necessarily for like real life animals, but I guess we'll give it a try. But some really beefy like biceps, triceps. I should know the name of this muscle, but I don't. Whereas the forearms are just absolutely gigantic. And there's so many muscles in your forearm that, weirdly, I don't know why, like biologically, why its forearms would be so big for what it does. So your forearm muscles mostly control you pronating and supinating your wrist, moving it, rotating it basically, because not all animals can do that, but at least in humans, that's what sort of these muscles are for. They're also for just sort of not even moving your arm like this or around, because that is a combination of all the muscles in your upper arm. So the muscles in your forearm really control a lot of the things in your hand, as well as sort of your wrist. So I guess it makes sense. I mean, for quite a while, Electabuzz was the... I was going to say it was the only Pokemon to have Thunder Punch, but I guess that's not true. Hitmonchan had it as well in Gen 1. But that was sort of its main thing, was Thunder Punch. It was like an almost exclusive move of Electabuzz. But like having massive forearms wouldn't really help with like a punch. That's a lot of actually, not even like your upper arm muscles, that's a lot of muscles in your shoulder, your chest, and your back that actually do that like punching sort of motion. Obviously having bigger muscles there wouldn't hurt. It would make your punch less powerful. Maybe there's actually some kind of like electricity generating organ in there. That could be that it just makes it look more muscly, but it's actually an organ that takes up that space. I could see that too. I guess that might definitely be the case, because I know in Elekid it generates its electricity by sort of windmilling its arms, and I think that might actually be canon for Electabuzz as well, but I don't remember that for sure. So I could definitely see that. I've also always kind of thought that Electabuzz looked like it has kind of like a pot belly or like a beer gut or something. And I think he does a good job of like capturing that here. It looks, for Pokemon, as like jacked in its arms as Electabuzz is, which just got this big old round belly, which I think is just funny. Not quite sure why, Game Freak or Creatures Inc. or whoever designed Electabuzz that way. Not really sure, but I think it's kind of entertaining personally. Let's see. Its chest also doesn't look like it has really defined muscles. Let's see. Its legs also do look quite beefy. Its femora, which is the plural form of femur, so your thigh bone, are very, very short, which is interesting. That is typically an adaptation for, let's see, what animals have short humeri, which is the upper arm bone, and femora. Generally, running adapted animals have that because it means you can get more strides in. So you want your proximal limb bone, so your humerus or your femur, to be short because that controls sort of how quickly you can move your leg back and forth, whereas you want the rest of it really long so that you have a greater stride length. But yeah, if the bone is shorter, that means the muscles can apply more like torque to it, basically, to turn it. So that's what that seems like to me, which I guess makes sense. You know, electric type Pokemon tend to be pretty fast. Electabuzz, I think, is it fairly fast? Let me look up Electabuzz's speed. I don't know it off the top of my head. Yeah, so Electabuzz, not that, you know, like its actual speed stat is the best metric for how fast a Pokemon is. You know, Garchomp, you know, it's canon that it can like fly at like Mach 2 or something, which is like twice the speed of sound. That's like over like 1,400 miles per hour, you know, 1,400 miles per hour. I don't think that's true. But if it is, you know, it doesn't really reflect its base stat because Garchomp has a base 102 speed, if I'm remembering correctly. Electabuzz has a base 105 speed, which is fairly fast for, you know, all things considered in Pokemon, which would make sense that its humerus is relatively short, where the rest of its limb is quite long. Although, once again, just talking about adaptations, typically being plantigrade, which means having your entire foot on the ground, as opposed to like a cat or a dog, which, so, for example, humans are plantigrade. When we walk, our entire foot, so if this is the ground, this is your foot, our entire foot is on the ground. Your cats and dogs sort of walk like this, with their toes, basically. Whereas then things like horses and cows walk basically like this, on the tips of their toes. This Electabuzz looks very plantigrade. So that seems very counterintuitive. The reason that you want to be sort of digitigrade, which is the on your toes, or unguligrade, which is on the tips, is because that increases your stride length, which means that you have to expel less energy to go as far or further than you would if you were plantigrade, which is why a lot of cursorial or running adapted animals are not plantigrade. I don't know of any really that are plantigrade. Almost all of them that I can think of are unguligrade or digitigrade. So, and once again, Josh was just sticking to the source material, so I get it, but come on, Pokemon, be consistent. That was a joke, by the way. The Pokemon Company is never consistent with anything they do. Moving on. Lastly for Electabuzz, the tail. So, Game Freak literally, like, cut the tail off a cheetah and pasted it onto Electabuzz. They literally, like, you know, Control V, or what is it? Control X, Control V, onto Electabuzz. That's literally just a cheetah tail. Which, if it's running adapted, I guess makes sense. Makes much less sense when you consider that it's bipedal. Being bipedal and potentially being cursorially adapted is not good. Being bipedal is actually horribly inefficient for that. It is pretty decent at distance running. It is not very good at sprinting. So it's just an inefficient way to be structured for quick burst movement. So anyway, that's Electabuzz. So let's move over to the Facebook post real quick from Joshua Dunlop. Had to move my face over a little bit here, but this is right on Joshua Dunlop's Facebook page. So he gives like a little story, I guess, of like a little bit of a backstory to this picture and like what's going on in the picture. So, in my younger years, I was working at the Saffron City Pokemon Research and Development Building uptown. This was my first official research job out of the academy. I'd love to know what academy you're referring to. It was about 2 a.m. and I was asked to stay late by my supervisor. I'd finally finished and headed down to my car. In the car park, parking garage? Is that what Brits call a parking garage? The dim artificial lights buzzed, creating small spots of light. Suddenly, I saw two men with dark clothes on and caps that shadowed their faces. Team Rocket, perhaps? Before I could get the key in the door, they had grabbed me. Oh, okay. One of the men pushed me against my car, while the other snatched my briefcase and started to try to open it. I was terrified, but noticed something inside his collar, a small stitched R. Ooh, I was right. Before I could speak, I felt a flashlight hit me. Squinting, I realized who it was. The late-night security guard appeared. He was a man in his late 60s, with white hair and a thick southern Unovan accent. So he's got like a Brooklyn accent, is I'm guessing what that means. I had brought him coffee from time to time. Calmly, he walked over and asked if I was okay. Before I could answer, they violently pushed me to the floor. Without a word, they both walked toward him, pulling out Pokeballs out of their pockets. The car park flashed red for a split second as two gnashing Raticate appeared in front of them. Those are some fine-looking beasts you have there. But did you really think they would leave somewhere like this unprotected? He said, followed by a loud whistle. From the deep shadows, I heard something shift. A low, rumbling snarl emanated from the darkness. With heavy footsteps, a fully grown Electabuzz stepped out into the light. Blue electricity danced over its static yellow fur as its muzzle curled into a snarl. I think it's about time you boys started to run, don't you? He said firmly. And if you want to read the full story, you can check it out at Joshua's Patreon. Moving right along to Magmar. So, Magmar has always been one of my favorite Pokemon just because it's so weird. Like, it's probably supposed to be a bird, but like other than its beak, nothing about it looks bird-like until Joshua comes in and talks about it a bit, or, you know, gives his take on it. So, the first thing that I noticed was not actually these, which I will talk about, but actually the hands, or the arms rather, because it does have like sort of ruffles or some kind of patterning or extra things on its forearms. Joshua took the whole idea of Magmar being a bird and just really ran with it. And basically everything on Magmar, short of like the fire, he just turned into feathers, so including the things on the forearms here, which I thought was super neat. So just these large, really pronounced feathers in these, you know, 3 or 4 rows along the forearm, which I thought was really neat. Well, I want to see if he talks about this at all in his little Facebook post. But I think it would be an interesting thing, because I think there's several Pokedex entries that say, like with Magmar, where it's like the heat that it gives off makes it sort of shimmer. I could potentially see that being not necessarily its heat, but an artifact of it sort of controlling its feathers to make it look like that. I think that might be something potentially really interesting. Let's see. I guess we might as well talk about these now since we're here. So Magmar has like spikes on its back. Joshua's like, nope, those are also feathers. So he turns them from like these spikes or bumps, I would call them spikes, but to just individual feathers along its back, which I don't know how I feel about. I think thematically with his whole, this is very much a bird sort of theme or you know, sort of gist that he's trying to get here, I think that makes sense. As for them actually being like sort of rigid, I kind of don't think that would work. I'm trying to think if there's any birds that do anything similar to this, where it's just they sort of compress certain feathers together to make something harder. I don't know of any. I guess penguins are probably the closest thing to that, because penguin feathers feel much more like hair, and that they're a lot stiffer, and that they actually have, they're called melanosomes, basically cells in them, or I guess since it's hair, there's not like real cells in the hair, but sort of pockets in the structure of the hair that are filled with melanin, which is the pigment that makes our hair, you know, like dark, you know, brown, black, or potentially our skin brown or black as well. And there are some animals that use melanin not just as a color pigment, but also as like a structure structural pigment. Penguins sort of do that to make their hair sort of stiffer and more durable. I could potentially see that. Just these being just chock right full of this red pigment to make them a little stiffer than like a normal feather, but I don't know. That's a pretty far stretch in my opinion. So with the lighting, it's a little harder to see, but it doesn't look like there's any feathers sort of below the ankle, because contrary to what many people think, birds do not have backwards knees. They just have a really weird foot. So, for example, its knee is probably here-ish. So its femur goes until probably here, and then they have, birds have really weird bones in their legs. So there's the tibiotarsus and the tarsometatarsus. So I would think that this right here is probably the tibiotarsus, tarsometatarsus, and then phalanges. That's probably what's going on here. So they do have actually they don't really even have an extra joint, because like right here would be like the ball of your foot, so where your toes meet the body of your foot. So these are just toes. Whereas right here, that is the bones between your heel, which is basically right here, and your toes. And then the bones between your heel and your knee, right here. And I know I've explained, bird legs before in this series, but it's always good to have a refresher, even for myself as well. So, but yeah, it doesn't look like there's any bones or any feathers sort of below the ankle joint, which makes sense. A lot of birds don't. Some do, but most of them don't. And then he does make it a very duck-like foot, with it being webbed like that, which makes sense for Magmar, because I'm pretty sure Magmar's art also has that. Also, the hands are very featherless. I would just, I can't talk about birds and Magmar being based on a bird without talking about the fact that birds at most have 3 digits instead of 5. So birds, it's kind of controversial. Most people think that the fingers that they still have are the thumb. Most people, pretty much everyone agrees to still have their thumb. And then digits 2. So thumb is digit 1, digit 2, and then digit 3. And then they lose the pinky and the ring finger. They just get rid of them. Some people argue that I think that they keep digit 1, so the thumb, digit 2, and then I think digit 4. So they lose the pinky and the middle finger. But either way, their hand is sort of structured like this. So the thumb controls a feather and part of the wing called the alula, which just sort of can help them change the shape of their wing, whereas these two are fused together that just provide extra support for the wing. So at most, Magmar should actually have 3 fingers, but it's Pokemon, so whatever. Let's see, and lastly, the head. Obviously, the bill looks very duck-like. Ducks very commonly have this thing sort of at the interface between their bill and like the actual flesh of their head, so that's a good nod. These right here look to me, I never thought about them this way before, but it makes sense sort of in a realistic drawing, that these are some sort of gland that give off whatever, oil or gas makes Magmar's fire, at least on its head. Potentially, I could see there being some other one somewhere in the tail, which is why the tail's relatively thick. I could potentially see that. But that is what it looks like to me on the head here. And then the eyes, yeah, I guess those look duck-like. I'm not an expert on duck eyes, but if you were to just show me a picture of the eye and be like, this is from a duck, I wouldn't question it. So, good job. I really like the way that this Magmar looks in general. I love sort of the lava-y background. But yeah, so let's see what Joshua has to say on his Facebook. So I couldn't figure out how to have it up in a way that showed the picture and the post, because he put 2 in the same. So it's like if I click on this, it doesn't say anything. So or at least doesn't show like the actual like text of the post. So we're just gonna read it from his just Facebook wall. So, let's see. I had been asked by the Pokemon Wildlife Foundation to join an expedition to the volcanic island of Cinnabar. The island has a large wildlife sanctuary due to the island's unique ecology that supports a host of rare fire-type Pokemon. That's really neat. That's a really neat thought, that it was some kind of like biological preserve, not just like an erupted volcano that destroyed the town. It was very early in the morning on the third day. Though the sun had begun to rise, it was shielded by an ever-present cloud of ash that loomed overhead. We set off in our custom rover adorned our aluminized, or perhaps if you were British, aluminium? Is how they say aluminum, but aluminized suits that would protect us against the intense heat. The rover was built specifically for the mission. It had steel wheel treads instead of tires, as the ground could melt the rubber. We rolled over the black sandy dunes until we saw it, the lava fields. Even from a distance, I could feel the heat coming through my suit, and the air rippled like a raging fever. Let's see. Coming over a hill, we were met with a large lava pool, slowly oozing out of the ground like molten tar. Then I saw it, something moving behind the waves of heat and smoke. I moved around the roiling pit to get a better view. It was a Magmar. Magmar secretes a natural flame-retardant oil from the large swollen glands on their forehead, protecting them from their own fire and external heat. Interesting. So it's not glands that produce whatever makes the fire. It is a fire repellent, or fire retardant is, I think, the word they use. Yeah, fire retardant. That protects it from its own fire. Interesting. I don't think biologically that's how that would go, but okay. Let's see. They preen themselves and spread the oil through their feathers. Male Magmar glands are usually larger than the females, especially in mating season. Interesting. That's a really neat thought. In general, really large, exaggerated features of any kind, but especially on birds, are generally for reproduction purposes, or like some kind of, hey, look at me, ladies, type of thing. I don't know if that's actually a thing in the games where, because there is sexual dimorphism in the games, I don't believe that Magmar is sexually dimorphic, but I don't know that for sure. They use their size as a way to try and impress a female, encouraging her to mate. However, later on, when a female is close to laying her clutch, her glands expand. Interesting. This is to help her produce more oil in order to protect herself from the intense heat as she travels closer to the nesting grounds. They lay their eggs in the hot sand near the lava fields, incubating them until they hatch. This Magmar was probably looking for somewhere to lay her eggs, and we watched as she waddled down toward the lava field below. And once again, if you want to read the whole story, please go check out Joshua's Patreon. So I want to thank you all very much for watching, and even more so if you happen to go support Joshua in any way, whether it's just a follow, a comment on any of his things, subscribe to him on YouTube, or if you do go as far as to support him on Patreon. You're an absolute legend, and I really appreciate you, and I'm sure Joshua does as well. Speaking of all that, you can follow me on Twitter as well at Pallet_U to keep up on all things Pokemon science, as well as if you feel like supporting us financially, we do also have a Patreon, link to which will be down below in the description. A massive, massive shout out to our current Patreon supporters, Patty Murphy and Sam McCarty. Your support, as always, is incredibly, deeply, deeply appreciated by myself, and as well as anybody else who has become a Patreon, in the future. Patrons get exclusive Patreon content, mostly gameplay footage of me playing some other games, typically science related. For example, I just put up an almost 2-hour video of me playing a game called Ancestors, I think Humankind Odyssey, I think is the technical name of it. So Ancestors, Humankind Odyssey. So it's basically a game that challenges you to sort of go through human evolution starting around 10 million years ago, and sort of progress to Homo sapiens, our species, quicker in the game than happened in real life, which I think is a really interesting way to play a game, or game mechanic, or game premise, I guess. So yeah, a whole extra 2 hours of me just sort of messing around in a video game on Patreon. Anyway, lastly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, there's a time and place for everything.